So to start things off, we'll hear from Dr. Luke Gelinas of Advera, a provider of institutional review board, IRB, and other services.
Thank you, Joanne, very much. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you all today. I am really excited about this topic. As Joanne says, we're going to be discussing ethical and to some extent regulatory issues that arise when using social media in research. I do approach this as someone who's a full-time IRB chair and formally trained in ethics, so that will probably come through. And I did want to say I'm going to move pretty quick just because there's a lot to cover, and I do want to leave time for discussion later. So start off, we're going to focus on social media as it's used or could be used as a recruitment mechanism or a recruitment tool. And this work, this sort of part of the presentation stems from some work I did a few years back. A bunch of colleagues and I at Harvard were talking about social media and its potential as a recruitment tool. And we were sort of concerned or perplexed at what to us seemed, the fact that it was underutilized. It really wasn't being utilized at the time. This was back in about 2014. And we suspected that some of that was due to sort of IRB unfamiliarity with the issues and some ethical uncertainty over what the ethical issues were, whether there were new or novel ethical issues that might be challenging. And we thought that there were some roadblocks that might be holding up the use of social media in recruitment that we could try to help clear up. And I'm happy to share the guidance that resulted from that work. So I want to begin with just an observation, which I hope that everyone will agree with me on, although it might not be something we're used to thinking, which is that recruitment challenges in research, I would argue, are really ethical challenges. We know from the empirical literature that rates of under-enrollment in research leading to early study termination are high, too high, and that leads to a number of ethical concerns. For one, you have a tremendous amount of waste that occurs when studies are began or launched, but then need to close early due to lack of accrual. And you also, I would argue, have participant protection concerns. So on the IRB, when we think about sort of risk benefit and whether to approve studies initially, we typically tend to assume that the study will in fact produce generalizable and valuable knowledge. And that's a lot of kind of what drives the benefit here. And when you have studies that don't actually complete, that under-enroll, that are underpowered, that don't meet their objectives, then the social value they deliver is severely limited or non-existent. And in those kinds of cases, we're basically asking participants to enroll in studies and to undergo the burdens and risks of research for what turns out to be nothing, or what turns out to be sort of social information of limited value. And I think that's a real ethical concern. There have been some good studies in the past few years trying to kind of quantify the extent to which this happens. And some of it's quite striking. That bottom bullet there was a study in which basically this group of researchers mined clinicaltrials.gov and concluded that of studies that had closed in 2011 alone, over 47,000 subjects they estimated participated in underpowered studies. And so for those 47,000 subjects, again, it's not clear that the risks and burdens they were asked to undertake were in fact justified, given that these studies did not meet their endpoints. So with that background in mind, this is sort of what spurred our initial work on this topic and thinking about to what extent can social media help researchers meet recruitment targets and help alleviate some of those ethical concerns that stem from these underpowered and early terminating studies. And there's an ever-growing body of literature, as most of you are, I'm sure, aware, that social media can, in fact, be an effective recruitment medium. Just to give you a quick sense of it, I won't go through each of these, but social media has really shown to be effective as a recruitment and retention mechanism across all sorts of different research studies. And I would also note that it's shown effectiveness at historically vulnerable, underserved, and hard-to-reach populations. There are some real success stories in that regard. That study from 2014 demonstrated that social media could be used as an effective recruitment mechanism to recruit gay Latino couples. Similarly, for young cancer survivors who sort of historically researchers have had trouble sort of tracking longitudinally and continuing to get data from them, Gorman et al. Showed that you could actually do better if you utilize social media as a way to kind of keep those young cancer survivors engaged and continue to collect data about them. And that last one is a real interesting success story, low incidence diseases. So that's a study from the Mayo Clinic published in 2011, and basically they met their recruitment targets for this rare disease study, spontaneous coronary artery dissection, in I think 3 days. So it was an amazingly quick success story where they found, again, they recruited everyone they wanted to in this study in a matter of days using social media as a recruitment tool. So some real success stories, and I think now we've gotten to the point where social media recruitment is really ubiquitous and sort of well acknowledged as a potentially successful mechanism for recruitment. So ethics and oversight. I think it helps here, and just to set the stage a little bit, the big question, as I suggested earlier, when we're thinking about social media and recruitment and the ethics of regulatory issues is, does social media raise kind of new or novel or in some ways more challenging ethical issues than normal or standard recruitment, the kind of recruitment we're all familiar with? And it can be helpful when starting to think through that question to think about the sort of recruitment that we're all familiar with and to distinguish two different types of recruitment. So we can start by thinking about what we can call passive recruitment. And really think of that as just the distribution of recruitment materials out in the public. So you're placing ads, you're hanging up posters or flyers, and you're leaving the research team's contact information on those materials with a hope that members of the public will come into contact with these ads and then reach out to the research team to learn more about the study. Next slide, please. Contrast that with what we can call active recruitment. And this is more targeted recruitment approaches. Rather than just leave materials out in the public and hope that people encounter them and call, this active recruitment occurs when the research team sort of identifies specific individuals or subgroups and actively approaches them with the aim of offering them more information about a study and ultimately of enrolling them in research. And often this occurs on the basis of the research team's knowledge of certain characteristics that would make the people they reach out to or target suitable candidates for their trials. So here maybe the classic example is scanning medical records to see which patients at a clinic might be eligible based on their clinical traits as disclosed in those charts, and then approaching them for enrollment in a trial. So I think these two different types of recruitment are sort of these are general distinctions. They apply across both sort of normal non-online recruitment and online recruitment. And what I want to note here is that when you think about either of these forms of recruitment, I would suggest that social media forms of engagement for both of these have strong analogies and more traditional offline recruitment of the sort we're all familiar with. So for example, in many ways, posting an ad on Facebook might be similar to placing a poster in a public clinic. Similarly, tweeting out an ad might be similar to hanging a flyer in a public space. You can see the similarities there, I hope. In the same breath, actively approaching, so targeting in an active sense, a member of a Facebook patient support group for some disease might be similar in some ways to approaching someone in an in-person hospital support group, or again, on the basis of their medical records, just as you scan medical records looking for certain features of a person that might make them eligible for your trial. So you might kind of look to Facebook and observe certain behaviors or certain group memberships as a way of identifying which people on the Facebook might be eligible and interested in your study. So I think that can help when we're thinking about social media recruitment, not to be overwhelmed, but to kind of step back and say, in what ways is this similar to kind of recruitment activities that we're already familiar with? That will help you kind of get a handle on the ethical issues. I don't want to suggest that social media recruitment is sort of identical in all regards to non-social media recruitment. What that process can do can help you get acclimated, and it can help you kind of sort out what the actually new or novel or particularly challenging issues are with social media recruitment. And I think the big issue here in terms of new or novel or unfamiliar or different ethical concerns are the privacy risks. So social media platforms, as we all hopefully know, that we're all probably on these platforms, they themselves carry inherent privacy and confidentiality risks that are going to attach to any recruitment and engagement efforts that take place over them. So these platforms typically collect data from their users and they sell it to third parties for marketing purposes. they basically are collecting all of the activity that takes place over these and then using it either for marketing or for other purposes. Whether or not they sell it to a third party, they might use it themselves for different ends. Another point here, which is supported by the empirical literature, is that a lot of people using these platforms don't understand really how to effectively manage privacy settings. It can be pretty confusing to figure out who exactly you're sharing information with on these platforms, and they might further fail to grasp the extent to which the information they share is publicly available. We probably all know people who share information that maybe they shouldn't on social media. It's not always clear that they intend to do so, rather than just they don't have a clear sense of how the privacy settings work, which is particularly understandable. I'm not sure when the last time you tried to go and look and understand, say, Facebook's privacy settings was, but it's not altogether straightforward for many people. And I think that's particularly concerning when sensitive health information is at stake, as it often is in research and research recruitment overtures. So the worry here is just that when you engage potential participants on social media, because people may not understand the extent to which what they communicate or what they say is going to be publicly available, or to whom it's available, you might have inadvertent disclosures of protected and sensitive health information, which is a significant privacy concern. So how should we approach these risks, and what should we think about them? I think they're real risks. They do warrant our concern. But I do think it's possible to be sort of overly paternalistic and too overbearing kind of when we think about these risks. So some people might argue that because of these factors, maybe we shouldn't be using social media at all as a recruitment, as a research kind of tool. I would argue against this. I think, on the one hand, at least, these are risks that have been voluntarily accepted by people when they choose to use the platform. People at least have an opportunity to understand those privacy risks and decide whether they want to accept and join the platform. Now, I think that at least speaks against a kind of categorical no or prohibition on using social media as a research, recruitment, or engagement tool. I would add, especially in light of current events with the Cambridge Analytica and all of Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg in the news, I think the public has a pretty good sense of the fact that these sites are collecting lots of background data, that there are real privacy and confidentiality risks, and it doesn't seem to be deterring members of the public generally from using these platforms. And that's an interesting question in itself, but at some point I think we have to say, if the public themselves seem okay with these risks, then it might be too overbearing for the research community and IRBs to sort of categorically prohibit the use of social media in recruitment efforts. That said, I do want to kind of do justice to the sense or objection that you might be thinking of. So the privacy and confidentiality risks of these platforms tend to be spelled out, but they're spelled out in these highly inaccessible documents, right? The terms of use or privacy policies. And there's some good empirical evidence indicating, one, that these documents are written at a very high level of comprehension, that many people, they're written in legalese essentially, that many people who aren't lawyers probably don't understand the half of them. And maybe more importantly too, is that very few people actually read them. At the IRB we read them, but some days I'm convinced that we're just about the only ones who actually read these documents. So it can be difficult for members of the public to really understand the extent of the risks. And it can make us wonder whether sort of consent to use these platforms is genuinely informed, or whether researchers kind of have additional obligations with respect to the privacy risks and the confidentiality risks to try to mitigate those risks. And I kind of look for a middle road here. I think that those are legitimate concerns, and I think that researchers do have perhaps a bit more of an obligation, at least not to make those risks worse, at least not to amplify them, and to take steps to mitigate them. So what might that look like in practice? Well, if you're a researcher recruiting over these platforms, you might have an obligation, or at least might be a best practice, to try to at least educate individuals a little bit at point of contact about the risks. So you might say, hey, we're recruiting for this study over Facebook or Instagram or whatever. And then when you have someone sort of indicate interest on your site, say, hey, there are some privacy concerns with disclosing sensitive information. Would you like to move this discussion offline? Give us a call. or let's do this via email or in some other perhaps more secure way where those same privacy risks are present. I think it's also important here for researchers to consider the extent to which there is or isn't an expectation of privacy. So you can distinguish what are public online spaces versus private ones. And I would say the more that an online space is private, the more care should be taken by researchers when recruiting from those spaces. Conversely, if you have a completely public open space, internet space, then I think that maybe the less care is warranted. Now, it can be hard, and you could probably do another whole lecture on how to distinguish public from private online spaces. One example of a public space is sort of typically taken to be Twitter, although even Twitter has protected sort of aspects to it, the direct message function, and just when someone wants to sort of disable the public feature of their account on Twitter, they can do so. But a good example of a public internet space or a post might just be an unrestricted tweet, something that anyone can access, even whether or not you have access to Twitter, and so on. An online space, and one example might be, let's say, a Patients Like Me group that requires you to both join Patients Like Me and to affirm that you have, say, breast cancer or some other condition or are a caregiver to such a person. So basically, the more work I think you need to do to access a space, if you need to create an account, if you need to affirm that you have certain characteristics, the more private it is. And again, the more private it is, I think the more care should be taken when researchers sort of approach those spaces. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. One way for that care to be taken is for researchers to be highly transparent when they enter those private spaces. First, I don't think researchers should be deceiving or falsifying traits in order to gain access to those private spaces. If there's a patient support group just for breast cancer survivors, I don't think researchers who aren't breast cancer survivors should be saying that they are in order to access those spaces. So they shouldn't be lying, shouldn't be deceitful. But more generally, I think the more sensitive or private these spaces are, the more researchers should be proactively disclosing their presence on these spaces. They shouldn't be lurking or creeping around these spaces. They should say, hey, I covered your group. I'm a researcher. I have such and such a study. Are you interested in learning more? Another important thing to keep in mind, and again, I think this the importance of this will be increased as the space gets more private, is there a moderator? Moderators can be very helpful for researchers to kind of ascertain the expectations of a group, its sort of customs and mores, and to get a sense of how the members of that group themselves kind of see the group, of whether they're open and receptive to research advances or not. And I think it's also important, this is probably an IRB point, to review the terms of use and privacy policy for privacy and confidentiality risks. I think that probably falls mostly on perhaps the sponsors, researchers, and IRBs. So maybe not just an IRB concern, because I think if you are an investigator working on these platforms, you should be familiar with those documents, and you should be willing to educate participants on their content, as I said earlier. Finally, here's a really important one. Know the details, kind of the technical specs of the platform you're using. I want to try to illustrate that in a couple ways. So I want to do just a couple of kind of thought experiments here. Let's imagine a principal investigator who wishes to establish an open Facebook page in the sense that anyone at all who's on Facebook can access this page. It's not invite only. It's not restricted to certain members. It's open to the entire Facebook community for recruitment purposes. And what they plan to do is instruct potential participants to indicate their interest by posting to the page. And I hope you all see kind of right away what might be problematic about this. Given what we discussed already, posts to the page by people will be public, or at least public to the Facebook community, and will be seen by others. And that would obviously allow others to infer potentially sensitive information about folks who post to this page, which would be ethically concerning. There's a solution, though. Next slide. And I think that it's probably obvious. I hope it's probably obvious to many of you, which is rather than, there's nothing wrong, I don't think, with an open Facebook page, but rather than have folks post to that page to indicate interest, you might have them call or email or private message the research team. And in fact, I would suggest that that's probably, it might be best in many of these cases to disable the posts, the ability for comments on this page, or at least if you're not going to disable them, to do a good job of kind of reviewing them and moderating them. Here's another example. And this one I think really gets at the know your platform point. So imagine a research team encounters the following tweet from a member of the public: depression medicine not working, looking for new options, #depression, #clinical trials. Excuse me. Imagine that the research team is struggling to meet their accrual goals, and they want to contact this person by tweeting back trial information at them. This one's a little bit more kind of ethically subtle. So what do you think might be problematic about this? And again, I think people might differ over this one. It's a bit more controversial. But remember that tweets are public. And so at least I would suggest and argue that if you were to tweet trial information back at this person, you're going to call further attention to what many of us might think was an ill-advised decision on that person's part in the first place to disclose their sensitive health information. And in doing that, you might amplify those privacy risks. Controversial, I said, because, it's possible to reply, hey, look, this person made a public tweet. They accepted the risk of using Twitter and making that tweet. Why think that we have any obligation to kind of mitigate those privacy risks? And I think in response, I would say, again, this is something over which people can maybe disagree, but we tend to, at least in the IRB world, try to hold researchers to a bit of a higher standard here. And a thought is just maybe one that is, one of sort of common human decency. If you can minimize the privacy risk moving forward, you should. And I think there's kind of an easy way to do that in this case. Next slide, please. Which would be, you might just use Twitter's private direct message function instead. Now that itself might have privacy costs, right? Someone might be a little bit off-put that you've direct messaged them, but I would suggest that in this case, it might be a less concerning option than sending a public tweet back at them. Now, notice that solution requires you to know that Twitter has a direct message function. So I do think it's important, again, to know kind of what your platform can and can't do, to understand the privacy settings as a researcher, as an IRB member, and to think of kind of creative ways either to move the discussion offline away from these privacy risks, to educate folks about the privacy risks, or to use functions of the technology that on their own might mitigate those privacy risks to some extent. I want to switch gears here in the time that's remaining and talk about online participant communication. So we've been talking a lot about recruitment, but this doesn't have to do directly with recruitment, although I think that studies that use social media to recruit will also tend to have more of an online presence. And so this set of issues I'm about to discuss might be more relevant for those studies that do have more of an online presence. But I think this is an important topic and one that the research community in general is pretty concerned about. And the issue is this: we know that social media is a great tool for facilitating communication between study participants especially. It's also used, although I think to a lesser extent, to facilitate communication between the research team and study participants. But I think the benefits here for participants are sizable. If you talk to patient and participant advocates about social media in the online communities that they tend to be a part of, you will hear them say and testify to how helpful these communities can be. They provide informational benefits to folks who may be experiencing or who may be involved in research for the first time. Being in a clinical trial can be an unfamiliar and daunting and difficult experience. And just having other people you can talk to provide you sort of just factual information, one, and two, social and emotional support can be really helpful for participants. Just hearing of others' lived experiences in similar situations might help, current research participants to learn and really to kind of thrive or do much better in their own situation than they might otherwise do. The issue and the reason I want to talk about this is because I think that there are also risks, and these are, I think in some ways it's unfortunate, the emphasis among the research community has really been on the risk, at least in the public academic literature. So there's a lot of people in that literature worrying about the extent to which communication among participants who are enrolled in studies can jeopardize the scientific integrity of the studies they're enrolled in. So you have a risk of unblinding when you have participants describing their experiences. And there are some bad actors. There are participants out there who intentionally try to unblind themselves, although even it's often for completely understandable reasons. There are some participants, particularly in phase 1 research, who will try to share their experiences in ways that allow others to gain eligibility criteria or gain entrance to phase 1 studies, even when they might not, in fact, be eligible for them. You have worries about misinformation being spread online in these participant support forums. And so there's sort of a number of both risks and benefits. And I'd just like to sort of encourage us as a community to think about these and to spend a lot more time thinking them through, because I think, we need to find a way to mitigate those risks, which I think are genuine, that in a way that preserves the benefits for participants. A lot of the proposals in the literature currently are pretty heavy-handed, and we do see currently some attempts made to get participants to agree not to go on social media at all, not to discuss their experiences. We often, or at least occasionally, see in consent documents basically asking participants to agree not to go online and join these communities out of fear for the potentially negative effects on the science. So here are some potential strategies for us to discuss. This is the one I just mentioned. I think it's too heavy-handed, essentially. So you could ask participants not to use social media at all. There might be some really high social media risk studies in which this is appropriate. But I would argue that it's almost always too heavy-handed. It doesn't preserve the benefits. It doesn't give participants a chance to connect with others in ways they might need to. And moreover, enforcement is going to be nearly impossible unless you have someone scraping the internet at all times to sort of monitor this. It doesn't seem feasible. Another approach would be to actively facilitate and monitor the sort of forums where we know this communication takes place. I think that's in itself okay. I do worry that it's time intensive and so resource intensive, and again may not be a feasible strategy ultimately. Here's an idea that I think needs to be tried, put it that way. I would love to see sponsors and sites taking the initiative here and trying to find ways to kind of establish forums, perhaps connected with particular studies, and encouraging their participants to join those forums, facilitating that interactive participant support. And at the same time, this would allow them, assuming that they have someone dedicated to overseeing these sites, to monitor them for risky communication. So rather than have someone who's trying to search the whole internet to make sure that the trial's integrity isn't being put in jeopardy, if sponsors and sites kind of themselves try to establish their own spaces here, it might provide a nice way to both facilitate the benefits and mitigate the risks. I think this would require some savvy, just because, look, patient groups, especially those who are highly sophisticated online, of course, they don't have to join any sponsor or site's, established forum. They can go wherever they want on the internet. So I think this really has to be a collaborative effort, and there would have to be buy-in among patient groups. Ultimately, this will be my last slide, it's really important on this topic to listen to participants, and I don't think we've done enough of that. I don't think that researchers have done enough to kind of put themselves in the shoes of the people who are participants. And when we think hard about, what actually motivates these risky posts, why are people making them? As I suggested earlier, there may be some bad actors who are just doing it, for the motive of profit in phase 1 research because they want to make money, or just because they don't care about the science. I think it's more often for understandable reasons that sort of aren't ethically concerning. I can completely understand why someone might want to know whether they're receiving a placebo or an active product. I can understand why someone would want to know if that was the case for their child, especially when, there are multiple, perhaps, clinical trial opportunities open to someone. Someone has to choose between clinical trial opportunities. They might be thinking, reasonably so, I really would like to know if I'm getting a placebo here, because if I am, I'm just going to move on to the next promising clinical trial. And from someone with a terminal condition for whom there's no accepted treatment, I think that's completely understandable motivation. This connects to the second point, which is that in many of these cases, I feel that the motivations are understandable, but they're also, at least often, kind of based on not a less than full appreciation of the importance of certain aspects of the science, of the importance of blinding, of why a placebo might be necessary. And I think that if the research community made sympathetic attempts to reach out to participants and to really stress the extent to which things like blinding, placebo controls, and so on are needed to deliver kind of robust knowledge and to advance therapies and cures, I think that there's some real dialogue that could happen there, that needs to happen there. Finally, if you're someone who's running a trial, I do encourage you to think about this before you start. You should consider your population. You should consider how savvy they are in social media, and you should have a plan going into it, either to monitor or to educate or to do both of those things, so that you're not sort of running into unforeseen situations. All right, my time is up. I think that's my last slide. Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to field questions offline if any of you have questions about the presentation or would like to keep discussion going.